Good evening, everyone. Welcome to May's Dirigo Labs Speaker Series. It's great seeing everyone this evening. For those who have not attended in the past, Dirigo Labs Speaker Series is a monthly event where founders and leaders share insight on how they overcame challenges, capitalized on their target market, and developed their products, providing you with actionable insight for your own products and processes. For more information, you can find us online at dirigolabs.org under our Speaker Series tab. I'd like to thank our sponsors for this evening's conversation. This free event is presented by Dirigo Labs and is sponsored by Valley Beverage, Bricks Co-working and Innovation Space, and the Harold Alphon Institute for Business Innovation at Thomas College. In addition, this conversation is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on our YouTube channel. This evening's conversation is presented by Kathryn Hansen, Schmaltz Family Associate Director of Multimodal Communication Programming at Colby College. In the speaker series, Kathy will facilitate a workshop on some key aspects of presentations that many presenters overlook. She'll speak on aspects of delivery and visuals and will provide a few tasks for our Dirigo Labs cohort to help make their pitches resonate with their audience. And without further ado, that's up to you.
Hello. Welcome to the end of a long day with more stuff for you to do. All right. I will be talking at you for a while, but I will be asking you to do a few things as well. We had a example pitch just moments ago. Does anyone remember how that one started?
A question. A question.
A question. How did you answer that question? Did you think in your heads? Did you nod? Did you do something else?
Raise my hand.
Raise your hand. One of the things we're going to talk about shortly is openers. That is a great opener, particularly because feel what you feel right now. How tired are you at this time of day? I got interesting facial expressions in response. In order to engage an audience, you have to think about where they are, what they're doing, emotionally, intellectually. End of day, kind of a depleted time for a lot of people. So to have someone ask you a question and cue you as to what to do by raising a hand means you kind of have to pay attention. And if you didn't, you saw the hand go up and thought, what's happening? And turned your attention to the speaker. So I'm going to talk about a few things. Unlike you who have to tell a coherent story, I'm going to jump around and go in an almost random fashion. So don't do as I do as I say. What I will ask you to do first is just take a couple of moments, and I have on the slide for you to take 2 minutes. I'm not going to give you a full 2 minutes, but think about, since we are at that time of day when maybe your energy is depleted, maybe you're not your best self, maybe you feel a little cranky and critical, let's get into it. Think about unsuccessful presentations you have seen. What specific mistakes made them unsuccessful? Or if you can't think of any bad presentations at the moment, what are some pitfalls that you think hallmark a bad presentation? So I will give you something less than 2 minutes to do that.
Like out loud,
You're welcome to do out loud. You're welcome to write it down. The pathway is yours so long as you're engaging in this activity. However, I am not grading you, even though I come from Colby College.
So I was in the admissions officer.
Oh, that's.
So let's take a.
Yeah.
First one was. Yeah, this person, the audience gasped again. Yep, I went the other way. I saw the person, the person, run from the toy. And.
No.
And there was a pause, so I'm gonna jump in. I should have told you I'm very rude. I apologize, or not. May I ask for a couple of examples of less than stellar aspects of presentations? Yes.
I'll give you one of mine.
Yeah.
So, I was an admissions officer at university. And I was running a summer scholar program. And we were giving the top student award to a student as part of the deal. I learned very shortly before that presentation that this young lady is in the process of transition. And to a man. And I got their gender wrong in front of 700 people, including, and it gets worse for me. I said her, the audience gasped. I stood like a deer in headlights for about a 2-second pregnant pause, and then I went, this person, and then they gasped again. The president of the university ran out of the room. It was the most awkward public speaking moment I have ever seen, and I was the guy who did it. I still remember my boss from that day. We still do lunch every now and again, and he still brings it up. He's like, that was the most awkward public speaking moment I've ever seen. And that's what I get to be known by at that place, I guess. So it was great.
If any of you have spent any time in the South, you'll know what I mean when I say, bless your heart.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of calling me a dumbass.
Other examples.
The one I shared is, getting too locked into notes, particularly when you know your subject matter. And all of a sudden these tools become tough, so I don't help you.
Yes, that can often lead to less stellar presentations. Give me one more and then I'll move forward.
I think technical difficulties, if you ever had a technical difficulty when you're presenting with something and it like stops you, you freeze, you kind of like, you get held back by what you don't need to be.
Oh, yeah, those are rugged.
Yeah,
Doing like a pitch. I work with architects, and exhibit building companies around the country, and staying on top to me is like a difficult task.
staying on topic, and I'm sorry, wasn't there a time limit? What was that time limit? 2 minutes? Has it gotten shorter?
Oh, 5 minutes. for the
Yeah,
pitch.
5 minutes. It's hard to go off topic and get everything you need to get done in the 5 minutes. So these are excellent and heartbreaking examples. I'm gonna skip one ahead here. One of the things that bad presentations often forget to do is think really critically and consistently about the audience. Yes, your presentation is about you. Yes, it's about your project, but if the audience really isn't involved, and if you haven't really addressed them in your thinking around this presentation, not going to land the way you want. So one of the things that is important to keep in mind is that audience does not work in isolation. There are other aspects of presentations that work in concert with that focus on the audience. So yes, your audience is important. You really want to think about appealing to them, appealing to their interests, filling in the information gaps. If they are not an expert, what do they need to know to get what you're saying? But you do want to keep in mind your purpose. And yes, your purpose is to get money, but I also mean purpose in the sense of, do you need to inform? Are you persuading? Are you selling? Are you doing a combination of these things? Thinking critically about what your purpose is helps you get a lot of information in a small window of time and a small window of visuals. So you do want to think about that as you go in the planning and preparation of the materials. And things like, how long is your time? As we mentioned before, talking about pitches with the example pitch, a 5-minute pitch is really different than a 30-minute, than an hour pitch. So all of these things work together, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about audience than these other things, because sometimes the audience can slip out of our focus a little bit more than they should. The audience is an expert. Or not all of the audience will be an expert, even if there are some experts in there. So you do want to think about, where am I making some assumptions about their expertise? Where am I slipping into jargon and acronyms that the audience won't know? Some they will, and you have to make those differentiations. What is known, what is not known, and you need to be strategic so they can follow along without those moments of, what? That's where they slip from your control of them. You do also want to make sure you don't make assumptions about, here's a fact. Maybe you need to tell them what that fact means, how it resonates, what the impact of that is. You are the expert interpreting things, so don't over rely on the audience to intuit, fill in gaps. Keep your control of their understanding of your project by filling those gaps in for them. Yes, you have to talk about the what. What are you doing? What's your project? It's not going to really be a good pitch if you don't do that, but don't let the why slip out of there either. It's kind of related to the last slide. Your audience isn't an expert, and they might have some questions about how the pieces relate, what the impact is, what the benefits are. So you want to make sure you are answering those why questions even as you are explaining the what. It is a compacted amount of time, so you'll have to do both, but you want to have that importance resonate so that your audience really gets it. We talked a little bit about first impressions. Doing this, getting you involved with a physical act or even a rhetorical question can make a difference. But often people start this way. Hi, I'm Kathy Hansen. Does that mean anything to you? Do you give I'm going to go very clean here, a rat's patootie about my name? I care deeply about it, but that's probably not the best way to grab your attention. I am not Taylor Swift, I recognize. You are not yet a name brand, so opening this way might not take advantage of that ability to make a striking first impression. What can you do for that? Yes, you do need to include your name, and it is good to say your name aloud, particularly because some of us have names where people might not know how to say it, but that isn't necessarily the best opening gambit. You do want to think about, do you have a striking statistic that will bring the audience up short? Whoa. Do you have an anecdote, a rhetorical question, or a question that where you let people know you're asking for some more physical interaction? Something that grabs the audience and makes sure you know you have their focus is way better than, hi, I'm Jane Doe. If you can do that, you're likelier to grab the audience and hopefully keep them. But don't let that take up a lot of the time. If you do tell an anecdote, make it really short. And I'm going to suggest, if you have 5 minutes, you should definitely not go over 1 minute with this opening gambit. And you should probably think strategically about how this can be a compact attention-getting opener. On the other end of your presentation, you want to, yes, reiterate the main idea. That might be how you end it, but a lot of people end, they've had that adrenaline. Most people say they hate public speaking more than death. So they think, I'm getting to the end of it, I'm getting to the end of it. And then they end with, that's it. Or, I'm done. That might not be the best way to leave a really strong impression. Probably isn't. So think about what you can do with that last line, which is likeliest to be what is remembered. Maybe it's a tagline, maybe it's a really pithy encapsulation of something important that your project does. But that last thing you say is what they're going to remember while they're doing the nice clappy clappy. That's what's going to stick most likely. So don't lose that opportunity. It's a really good way to wrap things up. If it feels like the audience isn't immediately responding, That's because you have a little bit of adrenaline. So up here, the gaps of space and quiet feel so much longer. So whatever you say last, try to don't say anything else unless you want to say thank you. Okay. Nothing other than that. Don't do that. It's fine. I'm done. Please clap for me. Oh God, get me off stage. None of that. So one thing I strongly suggest, and in the slides, any of these that have a green box around them are things I'm going to suggest you do to prepare. And one is write a few different openers, write a few different closers, practice with each of them so you know what seems to work best. Did you write one that's way too long? Do not do a 2-minute opener or closer. You don't have the time. But having a few different ones allows you to be a little bit more flexible in figuring out what is going to grab attention, what is going to leave an impression. And I would do it for both the openers and the closers until you get one that you think, yes, this is the way. And then you can practice that one and have it a little bit more second nature. Visuals can be important. Thank you. That was my TED Talk. Visuals are a communicative aspect. You don't just want to put everything in the visuals. You have to say some things. The visuals are up there while you're talking. So these things have to work in concert and not fight each other. So a few things. You want to make sure the back of the room, and I do believe it's a sizable room in the case of the pitch, has those people sitting there have the same ability to see everything on the screen as the people in the front row. And that includes if you have some sort of charts or graphs, often the legends on them or the labels for XY axes or something get very small. So be aware of that and don't let that happen in your slides. Try to keep the style as consistent as possible from slide to slide. If you change fonts in each slide, if you change color palettes in each slide, it's going to start being overwhelming and hard to see the coherence. And don't read your slides to the audience. They can read what's up there. If there is perhaps one word or a phrase for some reason on the slide, and that is super important, fine. But reading at people tends to take the energy level way down. And they're like, yeah, I can read. I don't need. So think about how can the slides complement what you're saying and not make it harder for the listeners to actually hear what you're saying. You want to be really selective. So unless there is some radically important reason to have a full sentence, phrases are going to work better. Again, if they have to spend a lot of time reading your slide, it's hard to do that and listen to someone. So they'll stop listening fully. So less is a lot more in those terms. Everything on your slides should contribute in some way. I've seen a lot of very good projects that have some sort of sustainability issue, and they often have that very heartrending picture of a lone polar bear, little piece of ice. But if they're telling me why their battery is more environmentally sustainable, I start thinking, is it a battery-powered polar bear? My mind isn't really going there. It needs to have visuals in the slides that really directly apply, or minds are likely to wander. And even though you don't have a lot of time, you don't have a whole lot of slides to work with, avoid the temptation to cram the slides too full, because then your viewer will not know where to look. That's a cruel thing to do to someone. I'm going to stop doing that too. Not nice, is it? That's better, right? You can use color for attention. I've used highlighting. I animated it. You don't have to. And as was just revealed, you don't get to. You get no animation. But that is all right. So disregard that second line about animations. They often distract anyway. You want everybody to see what you have on the slide. And backgrounds that have color to them often, this is another cruelty I'm inflicting on you. My apologies, I'll get that one off the slide. Colored backgrounds are not often your friend. And if you have, say, a photo of something that is a background, maybe it's partially transparent, that also can fight with the text. So you do want to be very strategic about that and think carefully about, can everyone see this? Am I giving people migraines? You should not give people migraines. If you have a color palette that uses red and green, a lot of people cannot sense that color difference. So if you have a bar chart with a red, blue, and green bar, maybe if those are the colors of your company's palette, maybe it's a red striped bar, a green solid bar, a blue dotted bar. Think about ways for everyone, including those who can't differentiate red and green, to experience the information. Similarly, fonts that do not have serifs or those little finials at the end are often easier to read for people with vision difficulties, people who may experience dyslexia. It doesn't mean you can't use serif fonts, but I would suggest using the cleanest, easiest to read kind of font that you can find. Again, we don't know who can and can't sense things in the way we do. So we want to make it so everyone can see that your project is phenomenal and there are no impediments. It also means it's going to be easier to use maybe one or two fonts. Maybe you have a title font and then a body text font. You can use more than that, but then for those people who do have sensory difficulties, it can become more difficult. So you'd want to try to be as welcoming and inclusive as possible. You will get a chance to see your slides on the screen you will use. So when you do that, you'll want to look at things like, do the colors display like I think? Our screens and the screen on which you will project for the pitch competition, they might register really differently. So it's something to look out for when you're practicing. And you can also check for the text size. And at the end of the presentation, I'll have a few other things for you to look for as well and check out in that. But those are things that, again, you want everybody to be able to see, understand, and get the full force of information from your presentation. Delivery, which sounds like I'm going to get you pizza, but you've already had that, so that's not quite it. Most people genuinely dislike public speaking, so often the delivery part doesn't feel very natural. I'll give you a few tips, but I'm also going to suggest practicing until it feels a bit more natural. It may never feel 100% natural, and that's okay, because studies have shown audiences often do not pick up on the nervousness of a presenter until and unless they say, gosh, I'm so nervous. So don't give in to the temptation to say that. Volume can be an issue, but if you're using a microphone, you'll just speak naturally. If there is any problem with the microphone, you need to kind of push from here so that the people in the back can hear what you're saying. And yes, this feels a little unnatural. If I were sitting down to a conversation with you and talk like this, you would run away screaming. That would be weird. So you do need to think a little bit about volume, but the mic, if it's working properly, should take care of it for you. As I said, with the end of the presentation, it'll feel like there's a long gap between the last thing you say and the applause. Because you have more adrenaline, your body is not working in its fully usual state. Similarly, when we have a lot of adrenaline, we start talking a little bit like auctioneers, and we tend to kind of rush, and then we often notice it and don't know what to do about it. So if you do find yourself speeding up at the end of a phrase or end of a sentence, pause and take a little breath. If you have a moment to take a really full breath, that's probably likelier to help you. But you also want to practice so that you know what a steady, regular pace sounds like for you. And when you do have the timer showing you, oh, my time's counting down, you're going to feel the impulse to rush. So practicing a lot means you will likely have less need to rush to get to the rest of your material. So practicing helps with that kind of rushing as well. If you do have a new idea or a really key idea, you can slow down a little, but that's for a phrase. If you do it for more than a phrase, then you sound like this, and people start wondering what's going on. So that's just a phrase if you want for some kind of emphasis, and you can speed up a little, also for just a phrase, not a full sentence, if you are trying to convey urgency or a sense of passion. So you'd only do those a little, otherwise steady and regular. To help you with that, because it's often the chemicals in our body making us feel more amped up when we're nervous, before you give the talk, take a couple of really deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth, to help regulate your body a little bit and make things not feel quite so stressy. You may feel stressy, and that's okay, but this will help at least a little bit. I told you I was going to talk at you in a disconnected way, and I made good on that pronunciation. And pronunciation is the next. If you do have difficult technical words that you have never heard spoken, check an online dictionary. If you don't have to use a difficult technical word, don't use a difficult technical word. But in some cases, depending on somebody's projects, there might be words that are complex that you've never heard spoken. So check those out before you have to say them, you know, like so out loud. Many of us have a lot of fillers in our speech in a commonplace way. That's often because our mind and our mouth work at different rates. If you've practiced enough, you'll have less need for that. But if this is something that is difficult for you, give yourself a little pause and think of what to say rather than a pause of silence tends to work better. But if you do find you have a couple of these slip out, most people don't notice. It's when you have big, long strings where it would be problematic. And if that is something that you know you struggle with, grab me metaphorically, I bruise easily afterwards, and I'll give you a couple of ways to practice with that. The body language can be helpful as well, but we often feel kind of on the spot when people look at us. So we have some things we tend to do. One thing that tends to make you look more confident, even if you don't feel it, is standing up straight. You'll probably have your feet about shoulder width apart, shoulders back, but be careful when you put your shoulders back. Don't do the chin up thing. Does that give you a good impression of me? Do I look like I'm suffering from some sort of stiff neck? So don't point your chin up or down. Try to stand up straight. And when you gesture, you want to keep your hands between your shoulders and your waist, kind of in this box. This is where gestures look most natural, and people in the back can see them here. You can, of course, emphasize things with your hands if you have 2 points. If you show the size or rough shape of something, you can do that. But other things you can do with your hands, speakers are generally rated more favorably when they have trustworthy body language. And this stance where you have your palms facing the audience, arms bent, tends to rate favorably because it looks like you're trying to connect. You're also open, vulnerable, approachable. So you can do that gesture with your hands. You can, if that feels uncomfortable, hold your hands at your waist. There are a couple of different ways to do that. And a few people like the Mr. Burns, where you tent your hands together. I just watched the new Apple release. A lot of people were Mr. Burnsing in that Apple release. But you want to do what's comfortable for you. So you don't want to do something that makes you feel forced. That will not create any good feelings. You also don't want to cross your arms over your chest. You're not likely to do it, but when you do, you are erecting a barrier between you and your audience, which is not what you want. Similarly, if there is a podium and you hold on to it, you're kind of looking a little bit more nervous with the clenched fists. And again, there's a barrier between you and your audience. Doing the drummy, fidget thing, if that's you, practice until you have something to do with your hands that is not those things. You also don't want to do the hands in the pockets, a little too casual. And then you try to get your hand out of your pocket. It's very awkward and uncomfortable. And I mentioned before, there's kind of a zone for gestures. If you go above that zone, you start looking a little frantic. So if that is normally how you talk, bring it down, bring the gestures physically down, because you don't want to give the wacky waving inflatable man vibe. It's not as trustworthy for a business leader as you might think. And that also means if you have movements generally slower, feels a little calmer, a little more possessed, and things where you gesture really rapidly. So you do want to practice the gestures so you don't commit any of the boo-boos. Practice with different hand options as well. If public speaking is not something where you feel comfortable, try having your hands this way or this way. Try doing this until you find one that feels less awkward or less uncomfortable, and make that your go-to move. But it does take a little practice, because if you wait until the day, then you might have that moment of, oh, right, I was supposed to do something with my hands, and then the gestures become very artificial. So practicing with this will help you out. Eye contact is that canonical thing where, yes, you should look at the audience, but some people say when they're here and they feel lots of eyes on them, that's just not comfortable. So you can fake it. And fun fact, people don't usually know. So you can look at people's foreheads. If looking at their eyes directly feels too confrontational, you can look between people. Whatever you think is most comfortable, I would practice a few different ways of doing that so you can find that out. But you also, if I'm spending the whole time staring at you, you're going to feel a little uncomfortable. You should. I'm very creepy. But it also means I'm ignoring other people. So you'll be in a somewhat sizable room. You want to look people on the left. You want to look in the center. You want to look to the right. You want to see some of the people in the back, middle, and front. So you feel, the audience feels rather, that they're included. And that also makes it look like you're more thoughtful, considerate, and aware of your audience. So you want to practice that as well. Notes, a subject dear to the heart of many. Ideally, you want to have practiced this enough that you know what you're going to say, you know the slides that come next without even looking. And some people will have the slides to them. If that's you, be careful that you don't do this and kind of point your boom boom at people. An occasional turn to the slides is fine to refresh your memory, but ideally it should be in your head. You can use notes in presenter view. A lot of people like that, but keep in mind that keeps you tethered to a podium. That keeps you a little bit more distant from the audience. So it might not give the impression you want. You can use notes on paper, but be aware that this does take practice, because if you drop the note or the card, you might feel a little more uncomfortable. A lot of people like to use their phone, but I will say, and it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I've literally never seen anyone do that without over or under scrolling and then feeling that panic of, oh my God, I've lost my place in the notes. And then they feel the panic and it doesn't ramp down for a while. So I'm not one of the judges. I'm not going to be there, but I strongly suggest you don't use your phone, because it's too easy when you're amped up to just not be able to control it. If you are using a handheld mic, do they have a choice of mics? Are they using the lavaliers?
So we usually do give you the option if you'd like to use a lavalier or a hand mic. But there are things to be mindful with both options. So with the lavalier, it's just important to know that it's going to be up to your mouth, but you have to speak clearly and directly. With a hand mic, you're going to have to hold it right at mouth level. Also, if there are two people that are presenting, that's also something to keep in mind for how you're going to be doing transitions.
How big is this room?
How big is the room? It's probably about the same size as bricks from if you come this wall to this wall from where you're being
It
presented.
will feel a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
Taller ceilings, a
Yeah.
little bit more shotgun. But good acoustics, should be pretty good acoustics.
Mhm.
It's a green block, everybody
Yeah.
will be checking it out prior to, so it won't be your first time.
If you do go handheld, that might influence how you do notes, because it's very hard to have a mic and anything else. So if you are a paper notes person, maybe you don't want to be a handheld mic person. So that is something to kind of think through. And maybe even practice with both if you have the opportunity, because, or if you don't, practice holding something as if you have a microphone to get a feel for the handheld. If that is, for whatever reason, not good, that might be a sign that the lavalier is a better fit for you. But whatever you do with your notes, please don't do the word for word, because it almost always makes you sound like a robot. Which, unless you are actually at the helm of a robotics company, and even if you are, I'm sure that's a good strategy. But practicing so that you know what you're gonna say will make you feel calmer, and you'll sound more natural and conversational, which makes you feel more like someone trustworthy, someone who the audience is gonna want to hear from. But we have to acknowledge, not everything goes right all of the time. And it's a good idea to think, okay, expect something to go a little bit wrong. And that way, if it does happen, you might not feel quite so, oh my God, what do we do now? One thing to keep in mind is, yes, you don't really have as much time or as much real estate on the slides as you want. So you do want to think about streamlining your slides. Maybe you can save a few things so that if you get a question in the Q&A, you can go to a slide. But one of the more likely things that can go wrong is you mispronounce a word. And if you do, you might feel that anxiety, or maybe you say the wrong word, or maybe you momentarily lose a place in the notes. There are a lot of things that can go wrong. And a lot of people will, for some reason, feel obligated to say, oh, I lost my place. Oh, I said that wrong. Don't announce the error. The audience might not really notice. You notice every error you make. You'll catalog it. You'll remember it for 60 years. Have fun with that. The audience is less likely to notice it. So if it's something that needs correcting, if you said the wrong word, you said the wrong number, I'm sorry, that should have been 30,000. Correct it and move on. Don't dwell on it. You don't have the time. And a quick correction makes you look like, I know how to handle a bump. Keep moving. If, I don't think this is going to be the case for you guys, they don't have the option to use video clips, so I'm going to slip past that one. If you do have, for any reason, a QR code on your slide, double check that it goes where you think it should go. Have someone not use test it. This can be a little bit of boo-boo, so I do think it's a good idea to have someone else using their phone in case for some reason your phone goes to it because you signed on to a service or something. So, and if you don't use a QR code, then don't worry about that. But one of the best ways to get rid of errors is to have multiple times where you go through your slides as you're going through the presentation. And I would say at least 3 full run-throughs, and I mean full without stopping. And that means things like you'll practice advancing the slides. You'll practice, you guys don't have animations, but you'll think about where you'll stand. That's something you'll want to do in the practice event so that you can think strategically about where to position yourself. Check for any transitions from one slide to the next or one idea to the next, where an audience might not see the connection. And I don't mean that in the sense of animations. I mean, does the content transition in an understandable way? Yes, certain things have to kind of change idea when we go from one slide to the next, but is it telling that coherent story? Do you need to move slides around to make that story happen? And you will want to proofread and proofread and proofread, because some things, like when they're in all caps, do not spell check in most platforms. So whether you use, I think this is true in Canva, I know it's true in Google Slides, I know it's true in PowerPoint. If something is in all caps, it will not get spell checked. So if you use all caps for titles, for instance, triple or quadruple check the spellings because it's really easy to overlook. And that's something, when you see it displayed on the big screen, you're likelier to catch those kinds of mistakes as well. So keep an eye out in the practice for that. I have talked to you as promised, but what questions do you have about presentations, about delivery, about anything like that?
That's like, I got it.
Yeah.
I'm not, I came in from like the Chamber of Commerce, it's like, it's on speech. So I'm not sure if everyone's here together and they're getting ready for a competition to do a pitch. But if it's like a five, but based on what you're saying here, it's like a 5-minute elevator pitch. And if you're pitching, a new venture and this is what I'm thinking, scale it or something, and so you know, to do it in 5 minutes, and I mean, for me, I think it's like the last thing is like when you're going in to do presentations and it's to a party of people that are doing nothing but having these multiple presentations on a weekly basis, and in majority is like, personally, like, you know, I'm going into it and having to sit and watch the pitch. It's the last thing I want to do is look at the screen. And you know, the whole idea of the PowerPoint, like deck of cards, this, you know, stack of slides and stuff. It's like, perhaps a little bit for me, it's like the hardest thing to like want to be interested in watching a person talk and showing me how to read the screen at all. So, but you know, if you have the ability, like where you're setting the stage and you're giving your pitch, and it's and when you know, it's good that you brought up visual. But I think it's like visual for anything and everything aside from what everyone knows is going to be there. And if it is interesting, it's just visual, it has good content on it, reading it, that's really good. And like, you know, you might just be able to get your information off the screen and have no need for listening. But in general, like, you know, from going in, you want to be entertained. And so it's like to have props, like, you know, so you know, if you're doing mining, like to have the lithium and like a, you know, a couple of ingots or whatever it is, and passing them around and having people, you know, listen, touch, feel, see. And if it's gonna be something visual, like, you know, maybe having that visual giving you the aura of what, of having them say, I want to buy this, I want to buy into this, and they're seeing the visual, but they're hearing like the vocal and the cadence of the pitch. And if it is like where you knock on the door, you set up an appointment, you have a meeting, you get a group of people to come in, and they don't really know what it's all about, and it's, you know, whatever kind of business it's in, it can just get to be like a weekly obligation where you can go and do. And like, what's more important to you is like, you know, what kind of lunch you can get. For sure. And when you're doing the pitch, it's for sure, like, you know, is making sure that you have the lunch to get the audience in and and supply it and feed them well. And the ones that fall asleep are the ones that keep children like, you know, leaving in the middle of the pitch because they have other things to do. That's okay, but the one that stays around, it's like, you know, so at the end of the pitch, when they can, where the score is like when they do ask you a question, just like one question is enough, let alone somebody comes up and asks you for a card.
You raise a really good point that a pitch, a presentation is a chance to give someone an experience. So thinking about not just, I have this piece, I have this piece, how does this all work together to create that, ideally, something of an immersive story of the project. I think that's a really good point, that if it's just these separate pieces, it does feel like, Okay,
Get them to want more at the end
yeah, yeah.
and to remember you.
Kevin, what's your take on moving around the stage, walking around, too much walking, not enough walking? There'll be a decent amount of space that presenters will have during your pitch. I feel like I'm almost I like walking, talking. What I noticed you seem to be using your space very well and defined. You're moving around, but you also weren't. You know,
I was gonna try and trip.
yeah,
them.
it doesn't like attract you either. So what's your kind of take on just like walking the stage or walking your setting?
You make a really good point there about, there is a particular space here. There is, I'm here a little bit confined because I figured this was a little weird and intimidating, because I didn't want to move over here. Although I could just, no. But in a space like this where you do have some room to move, it depends a little bit on your comfort level, but some people note that people notice movement. So if you see me move, you're likelier to kind of pay attention. So if you are, for instance, changing to a topic where you're like, oh, I really want people to notice this, that might be a good point to start walking a little bit, because animals notice movement. But you do want to practice that, and you don't want to do the thing where you're constantly pacing, because this is really tiring. And yes, I'm moving, but after a certain point, you're just thinking, does she have to pee? So you want to have natural it's like the speaking pace. If you choose to move, and you don't have to, you would want to think about, is it serving a purpose? Can be different purposes for different people. It might be to signal a change of topic in the presentation. It might be because you are just trying to draw eyes with movement. But it also needs to be something that is part of the package that makes you commanding and at least seem confident. If you never feel confident as a public speaker, a lot of people report that, that's normal. But slower, steadier movements, you would want to practice it. So if you are thinking of moving, practice that in one of those, I said at least 3 run-throughs, practice that as part of it. And you might not choose to do it, but it can be something, especially if you are someone who feel better when you move a little bit. Standing still might not be something that makes you feel comfortable. So play with it a little bit. It doesn't mean everybody has to, because if it's something that makes you uncomfortable, that's likely going to impact your delivery, your performance, and why mess with that? But if it is something that you think serves a purpose and helps you convey the persona you want, then practice with it and test it out.
I
Yeah,
think all of this kind of comes down for me as just it, as you said, it's all a show. And as a show, it is very much theatrics. You're putting up a persona, you're telling a story. People, apart from those who are around you, won't really know who you are. So you can sell whatever you want, but it has to come from a persona. It has to come with a whole set of punchlines, right dialogues, right set of movements, position. It is definitely a theater show, and you have to put it as such. You have to choreograph it as such. You have to block it as such. And I think that is when you get an audience that's so immersed that they go with your story. And once you command an audience like that, they're going to vouch for you.
I would say that too, like I was just gonna say, for me, I don't have like pitches memorized, and in like the first meeting you had here, I was like, oh, okay, all right, we're just going. And there were people in that crowd that I've run into since that have no interest in my product whatsoever, but they were like, your speech, like your little pitch was fascinating. It was like so good. And they quoted back to me. I'm like, I don't even remember what I said because it was all improv. Like I was just in the space improving. Like I know my product, obviously, I know why I did my product, and like that was enough information for me to just like have a little whatever that I said. And so I'm wondering too, like the balance of, I don't know if this is a universal thing, but I know for me anyways, what's been really helpful is just like knowing my shit and then just not scripting it at all and just being like, having some ideas of like what I kind of want to say and then just like being really clear on like my what and my why, and then just sort of doing it. And I've gotten really great feedback from that strategy, from thinking of it as like an improv.
These are almost two different philosophies. One is the performance, and some people say with public speaking, they have to imagine themselves almost playing a part because they, as the individual they are uncomfortable with it. So it ties into that idea of this is a performance, I'm embodying a character. You almost seem to be saying something like, for you, this comes from a more, a place of the authenticity of who you are, what you're doing. And maybe even the passion that got you started doing this lets
Yeah.
you be steeped in.
Well, I do
the
feel like
project.
I'm cosplaying an entrepreneur.
I think,
I'm not, I mean, like, I'm just me, like, acting as if I'm an entrepreneur, you know, like, maybe fake it till you make it a little bit, but like, I don't know. It is like an algorithm of my authentic thing, but like, this is just a thing, like, I have many more interesting, no offense to anyone here, but like, I have many more interesting things about me than like the product I designed and like sell, like, this is just the retirement plan for like all the greater things I have planned for my life.
I'd say that they're both the different sides of the same coin, like it is theatrics to you
Yeah.
as well, it is
Yeah,
a thing that you do know the script for,
Yeah,
you're performing it yet still.
yeah,
And that, even then, I think to add on to what I said, even if you know your script, all the more reason for you to perfect the act, so then you don't have
this
to
is what I'm
think
saying,
so
I think
much.
it's about the act.
Yeah,
Like with me, it's less about the script and more about like, who am I trying to be, what am I trying to like, who am I trying to present as? And then the words just like, because I'm like embodying this character, which is rooted in an authentic version of myself, but like is a character nonetheless. Then like, what would I say if I were this character? Well, it's obvious what I would say in this moment if I were this character, you know?
the one caveat I will mention is because the time limit is kind of,
5 minutes, yeah,
and it is, as we mentioned, it is really easy to kind of tangentialize
yeah,
or maybe kind of rabbit hole a little bit on a point that you really love, but non-experts might be like, So knowing what you're gonna say and going through at least a couple of times, so you know you hit the time limit. And if you kind of practice it a couple of times, it's not scripted, but you know what it is, so you kind of know you are going to stay within that limit.
yeah,
So that's the one caveat I would have about the not really having the super planned out version.
yeah.
But you can't, people can go the other way and have a script, and then they kind of sound like this, talking as if they've memorized it, and it kind of sounds like you're not even excited about your own project. I'm not gonna get excited about anything. So you do want something that allows space for, you do something about everybody's project, got them jazzed up at some point. So if you can't have at least a little bit of that, you don't want the weird fakeness I just did with like, too much, but if you can't have a little bit of that, then the super scripted way is definitely, it's kind of like the chart we saw earlier. It really goes down very quickly, and there is an empty, hollowed out mind, not what we want. Also, not really worth investing in, learning.
Kathy, your role at Colby, what exactly do you focus on beyond just this type of public speaking stuff? Like,
I have an appointment in 2 places. One is called, I'm gonna take a deep breath because it's long, the Program for Academic Success and Transformative Learning, which is new, and it's basically a student success center that we are putting together. So more information there. The other thing I do is the Center for Teaching and Learning. So I get to help professors teach better, some science of teaching and learning stuff, some various other things. And then the thing that is being made right now that has the long name is helping students learn how to learn. Often people think, I'll just cram before a test. That's the way to get things in my noggin in a way that's deep and lasting. No,
he was pretty good at that in college. It works.
no.
You got way better grades than all of us that actually tried to study.
Does he remember anything
Oh,
that
it's-
he's learned?
The important parts. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this whole like persona, and it's been obviously propagated by Shark Tank, like that type of world that's out there, like catchy pitch, be a person, be whoever you are. But I don't know, I'm wondering if you think that there is like, maybe a little bit of foil to that. And the person I'm thinking about is everyone's talking about creating a person with Adam Newman, who raised, $60 billion at SoftBank and was terrible CEO and ran a novel business.
Oh, we were.
So, yeah, we were. So are you really trying to promote someone who is this persona of yourself, or are you really trying to focus on your?
He raised though, didn't he?
He won. He won the game. He won the game.
He was a bad CEO, he raised though.
If
And
the
he's
goal,
still
if the goal is to raise and end up like Adam Newman, that's not the goal I'm looking for.
But that's the goal you don't want for your startup, not for a pitch. For your pitch, you want to raise.
I just, the valuations are there. He also ended up walking through the streets of New York barefoot. It's not, yeah. You're not wrong.
That's a tetanus risk.
It's a lot of
Something-
tetanus.
Something I can add that I think might be helpful too is be mindful that when you pitch, you're pitching for 5 different judges that are judging 5 different aspects.
Yeah.
So each judge is focusing on a specific piece of your pitch. So you've got your storytelling, team, your impact, your capital strategy, and your innovation. So each is gonna be judging and looking at those 5 different aspects. So as you're presenting, you're gonna be mindful of all of those things and not necessarily thinking this one person is gonna be focused on those 5 different aspects. Each person is gonna be looking across the board at how you present and those different aspects of your company.
You pitch it in that order?
In terms of how the cohort's going to pitch?
The ones that you just.
Nope, it's just there are 5 people on a panel, they'll ask questions according to that category, and they're assigned to that category to judge each cohort company.
I think Nick also raises a good point. I can hear Susan in the back of my head here, which I think we talk a lot about as a team. It's like Shark Tankification, right, of entrepreneurship and there's a lot of people that think that's what entrepreneurship is. I think all of you probably know that it's not.
Yeah.
This public pitch is a performative pitch.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of times, as we've talked about, as you already know, your pitch is gonna be probably an email to an investor, try to secure a meeting on a coffee or sitting in a conference room, and it's gonna be completely different. But there's still the importance of the public communication, number 1. Number 2, I think you raised the important point that and this isn't pejorative, for any pitch competition on who the winner is or the perceived winner, but whoever takes on the pitch prize doesn't mean that they're actually the most investable company. Right? It could just mean they gave the best performative pitch, which I think can be frustrating. I would hope for all of you that really this is about increasing your sphere of influence, right? And it kind of sets you up for those later, more interpersonal pitches, and that's where your finance models come in.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that because I do think I'm not watching Shark Tank, but sure.
I
You
don't.
talk to your parents. I know when I talk to my parents, they're like, oh, like Shark Tank.
But
More cute, right?
I
Yeah.
think I have a problem with Shark Tank for largely the kinds of things you were isolating. I think if people say this competition this is a chance for you to present the best, most ideal version of someone who can articulate the promise of the project. And for some people, that is going to be highly theatrical, and maybe it's not really them. For some people, this is my authentic self telling you about something that matters to me. And I think it's going to be different for different people, but I think if it's the best version of the person who can talk really compellingly about what that project is, that helps with the performative, but it also helps kind of fight some of the Shark Tankization.
Shark Tank. I like that.
Yeah, like I'm not quite sure how to normalize that, but yeah, so I think that is the reason why that show kind of makes me go, I don't know.
Well, if people get really good at pitching, it's because they've been pitching a lot, right, and failing.
Yeah.
Likely.
Well,
Yeah.
you really are very good at the feedback loop rabbit hole right now.
Whenever the people that get the most experience pitching and progressive in pitching skills are the ones that also don't get funded.
But also sometimes really good pitches come from someone, kind of like you were saying, I know my shit, I know what matters to me. And because of that, it's like, tell me more.
Yeah.
Even if that's not something that she's rehearsed 172 times, there's that kind of magnetism of, you do know, and I want to know too.
Even if they don't want the product, is what I found.
But you
No,
don't want to
that's-
overdo it because you don't want to end up like Stanford, which on one hand produces the maximum number of uniforms, but they also produce FTXs and burnouts.
Please don't do that.
That's right.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, you can be
You don't
very
lie.
stylish
You
without.
don't
some-
lie.
You don't.
You don't fake. I know somebody said fake it till you make it. I don't think that's why we're here.
No.
We're here
Yeah,
to learn how to make the biggest influence, really the word that I would pick up from you.
Oh, when I said fake it till I make it, I mean fake the confidence of like presenting until you are it. And I would say that that's actually what's worked, like, it was a long road to identify as an entrepreneur, and I would just say it, even like with my teeth gritted, you know, because it just was so against everything that I was for most of my life to that point. And now it's starting to feel more authentic, like, yes, I'm an entrepreneur, but if you ask, like, when we were, I mean, 2 years ago, I couldn't say it with a straight face, you know? But I said it anyways, because I was like, at some point, I'm gonna feel this, you know?
and the fake it till they make it with confidence. A lot of people, when they present, never feel ultimately 100% confident, but that kind of faking, I feel like, isn't really lying. It's kind of embodying a persona to shed that best light on whatever the project is that you're representing. I say it that way because some of you have very wildly varying kinds of things, so I'm being vague and non-specific.
Moral of the story, just the night before, cram it all in.
If I've taught you nothing else,
So,
I do have a couple of things on a checklist I'll show you really quickly.
One last question.
Oh, yeah.
For 7 o'clock pitches, naps good or bad?
I'm someone who can't nap. If I go down, I'm down for several hours, so you're asking the wrong person. Show of hands, naps for 7 o'clock pitch, yay or nay?
Men's on the night before.
Oh, we got no hands up. Oh, I wasn't sure where you're going with it. No judgment.
I will.
You can always reclaim your youth.
Yeah.
Some of the things you want to do before the practice event, if you can, practice advancing slides with and without a clicker. Just to get the feel for both, and you never know when a clicker might not work. So you want to be able to feel comfortable and have that muscle memory for both. Practice the hand gestures, posture. If you do have tricky words, it might not apply to everybody, but you would want to practice that several times. Do the practice where you have experience looking at different parts of the audience. If you have any planned pauses, some people like a short silence to call attention to something. I do suggest practicing with the different mics, even if it's kind of I'm a 12-year-old at a slumber party talking into a hairbrush, but do get the feel of it so you know if it does or doesn't work for you. And then during the practice event, that's likely a good time for you to notice, oh, I misspelled that. You can kind of look at each other's as well for spelling, make sure everything is legible. You also want to make sure you didn't do it too big, because if I recall, the screen's kind of large. So you don't want it to be, that's the technical term. You also want to make sure that the way you set up your slides, nothing gets cut off. So keep an eye out for that. Maybe something just extended too far off the top or the left. You don't have animation, so don't worry about that. But also it's a chance to check that if colors don't display the way they do on your screen, maybe if you have a blue and a green and they kind of look the same, you can fix that before the final version. So just a couple of things to keep in mind when you are practicing.
Adding on to that, sometimes when you're exporting from PowerPoint or slides to a PDF, it throws things out of whack, so be
Yes.
sure to check it at that point.
And also for reference, you will be presenting on a white screen, so a wall. There is no like projection screen that's gonna come down. It's gonna be a blank white wall. So keep that in mind when you're putting together your slide deck.
And there'll be other things you want to check as well, but these are just some things to keep in mind.
This may be theoretical, but when I listen to audiobooks, I put it down to point index, so I can listen. But
I go 1, 2,
when I'm
5.
actually pitching, I don't know what I need to do. Maybe I take it to 1 when I want to go faster, but then at some point when you're saying take a pause, bring it down to 0.75. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out as an idea, and what would you say?
It's gonna be a little bit different for everybody because there will be different projects, there will be different speaking styles. The fact that you're going to have a different way of presenting than you do, it just means you're humans who are not clones. Congratulations. I think it's the sort of thing to experiment with, so that people can kind of get a sense of what works for me, what works for the project, what works within the time frame as well, which is a limitation that is firm, so it's something to consider. But that's something I would suggest maybe playing with a little bit during the practices to get that sense of, oh, this is, for me, this is what's gonna work.
And you'll hear this all next week, but just to give you kind of a thumbnail sketch of what it's gonna look like, you're gonna be assigned a pitch order before. So everyone's gonna know when they're gonna be pitching at what point in the evening. 6 to begin with, break 6 to end. So you'll know where you are in the order. That'll give you more time to either practice, take a nap, or figure out how you want to do your presentation. Say if it's like Nick and Ryan are doing a presentation, if Ryan should do it first and then Nick will follow, like that way you can kind of play off of one another. Depending on how you want to be mic'd up, you'll do that beforehand. And we'll help you with that as well, but you'll get a chance to run through your tech. You'll see the presentation, what it's going to look like. You'll be timed, so you'll get the opportunity to actually practice in front of your cohort members, but also us. So we can give you any feedback that you might need. But you'll be in the physical space, so you can kind of see the ambiance, how loud you need to be. If you need to pace something, if you need to take something out of your deck, that would be the time to do it. Because once these are all stitched together, it's gonna be difficult for us to kind of pull things apart and get things ready for you. But we're here to help.
Your audience will be, as you probably heard or assumed, will be kind of Maine's ecosystem of entrepreneurial support. So your MTIs, your funders, your practitioners, academia, philanthropy, students, but you'll also have there will be general public, folks interested, small businesses, so it will be a pretty diverse crowd.
Our parents have been with us that day.
Your parents, if they love you and they've watched Shark Tank before, they're strapped, you know, on a Christmas card.
Unconditional love family members are welcome to.
Make sure they register.
Oh.
But I mean that we do have a cap on attendance for the event. So if you do have anybody that would like to register for it, we have a cap at 75 is what we can have in the space. So
I hope I'm not oversharing on this, but we're expecting to do kind of a crowd favorite polling, so, mom and dad.
Let's stack the crowd.
And
There you go.
We have had it passed.
We have.
Hammering the like button. I'm not suggesting that a strategy, but we're talking strategies, yeah.
Is it only for in-person crowd or is that?
I think there is actually.
There was a QR code.
there was a QR code. Yeah.
Okay.
They were live streaming the vote.
So there is a little audience interaction there.
Okay.
Something to think about.
Any last questions?
Is it the 5 that are listed on the?
Nope.
Are we supposed to be giving this information out?
Oh.
TBD.
It's a secret for that.
So that you can't be the judge of it time.
Yeah, we're not gonna gamify it that.
We do know one that
Can I
was-
lie and say it's me so that people just give me
Yeah.
cake?
Yeah.
It's not me, but.
Exactly.
We usually allow our pitch competition winner from the previous year to come back and judge. So we've had Sasha Derry, who was judged last year. So. I don't know if that happened from Crop.
Who won last year?
Crop.
Who's crowd?
They were building envelopes that were removing carbon dioxide from the air.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Sasha, Blue Ship, Aeronautical, Brunswick, wanna inaugurate that. We have some incredible pictures. Actually, everybody did really wonderful.
I was kind of glad I didn't judge. I was like, dang.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you heard from John and he was in that cohort with Sasha and
Good question,
how
Rob.
doesn't that, the success of that company.
Where's the?
Yeah.
The registration, Rob did ask a good question. I will put the registration in the Slack for everyone that way if you'd like to send it out. Please do so.
Before we just sign off, I just want to say an extra special thank you to Kathryn. Thank you so much. Especially on these performative pitches, so important. And is it all right if folks contact
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
on questions? All right, if that's desirable, we'll send along some contact information
And I am showing up to the practice.
and
so,
into the practice.
Yeah, I'm happy to give feedback then. You might not be able to escape that then.
Also, John stepped out, but to John, who's also our EIR, and was in our cohort as prospector. John's fabulous, lean into him, if desirable, and, what we'd say to John is, thank you for growing your business here, in downtown Waterbrook. He's done a fabulous team, managing teams all around the world. And shows what he can do here in the state, and he's used a lot of these support tools, so kind of lean into that. And then just as a research note, just wanted to follow up on the previous week on some of the economic incentives. Maybe just kind of 3 quick corners of that, the flag. At the beginning of the week, you heard from FAME, Finance Authority of Maine, of course, on the Maine C capital tax credit. You should all be eligible for that program, right? You really should want to think about getting an application going. If you're planning to raise some capital, which most of you are, and you need to do that now, and that's gonna be, speaking of your pitch, that's a very lucrative tax credit that the investor's really gonna like, and that's a program that's just sitting there, waiting for you guys, so. Chris, who you heard from, of course, is the attorney, and he reviews those, so it's a wonderful opportunity to socialize that, go back and forth, and we're here to help you with that as well. Number 2, you heard some of those Maine-based incentives yesterday. A flagging Pine Tree Development Zone program, which is probably the tip of the spear when it comes to economic incentives in the state of Maine. I'm just a little cautious and nervous because that program is sunsetting the next 7 months. So I don't want folks to lose sight that there's still opportunity there, but it's transitioning into that more flexible Dirigo incentive program that has broader eligibility, including in some instances in Cumberland and York County. That application's targeted to come out this summer. You guys will still be in our continuum of support, but I don't want you guys to lose sight of that. Likewise, all of you are potentially eligible for that. So ETIP, reducing some of your payroll costs, capital income tax credits, sales tax, if you're buying anything. These are wonderful tools. And then maybe lastly and third, tax increment financing. For those of you thinking about in the future or now, building anything, doing a facility, doing an office, that's going to be negotiated at your local, your municipality. So that's a place-based economic incentive that you'll shepherd in the local municipality. We do a lot of tips in this shop too, and we can help you with those. So keep those things in mind as you're growing, and all those programs you want to do early before you have a spend or before you have a burn, and there's rarely retroactivity. So I know you have a lot going on. You kind of need to plan for the plan and stack these incentives. And in all cases, in particular, Gabe and I do a lot of work on the incentive side of the house. So just free confidential review on eligibility and channel eyes, and in some cases, have the authority to negotiate those on behalf of the municipal government or the municipal governments. Otherwise, again, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Kathryn, for your presentation. Fantastic. I learned exactly what not to do, and I hope that in my exit, I can follow exactly what you did. This conversation has been recorded and will be available for you on our YouTube channel. And thank you to our sponsors, the Harold Alpine Institute for Business Innovation at Thomas College, Valley Beverage, and Bricks Co-working and Innovation Space. Thank you, and have a good rest of your day.